son. And that's why you have mom and son or May son. And so, trying to just put everything in quickly. So May son, from the Masonic orders, which some of you probably have run up against if you're studying, and the secrets of getting the veil there, is the story covering up the truth about birthright, which is mother and son, all that's on the planet. So I just like to, and then also one other thing, astrology. I do deal with astrology and written astrology books because that is not something that is for entertainment only. So I can set the stage right now. The zodiac wheel that was left by our ancestors is a teaching tool that teaches the science, and it is designed to teach our children of the workings of nature, of the energies of nature, because that's all there is, that's all there are is energy. And it describes it and teaches them. So instead of Barney, Yogi Bear, etc., whatever they're putting in front of the children today, your ancestors left you the zodiac wheel with those characteristics on them, the sheep, the goat, and we are supposed to, etc. And we're supposed to be teaching that to our children so they have what? Understanding of self, understanding of others, and tolerance for others. We don't have tolerance for others because we don't have understanding of self and what we produce, sisters, and put into society. We don't know that there's an incoming and an outgoing energy. Some people walk in the room, they're outgoing, they're fire signs and air signs, in short. And those who come in and they sit back and they're quiet, you think they're quiet, they don't say much, they're incoming energies. That's the ebb and flow, it's the polarity, like a battery. So they're water signs and earth signs. That's what they're supposed to do. So we don't have that understanding, so we think someone is different because we don't understand the ebb and flow of the energies of life. So I'd like to set the stage with that.
So, carrying off, greetings to everyone, and I want to give honor to all the mothers in the house for bringing us here. I want to carry on what Brother Jelani was saying. One of the things that I recognize as commonly unique with us is because we've been under the intricatera miseducation for so many generations. When you give the people some of the missing keys, it confuses them because it clashes with what they believe to be true. When actually our forefathers didn't deal with belief, they dealt with science and facts. And belief is a first degree represented by a candle, and that's for children and babies. Then there's faith for teenagers, then there's fruition for adults, and when you become an adult, you put your childish things away. And so the problem that we have adults that are still in the mental stage of beliefs that children have, and then trying to introduce them to a civilized world and to science of the planet and the universe, and it clashes with what they believe to be knowledge, which is actually the lowest level or the lowest elementary basis of fundamental child's education. And so what we have to do is do the best we can to try to get them to stop being boys and girls without insulting them, and take them into the levels of knowledge and science that the rest of the civilized world uses, and that the world actually runs on, which is really the keys to the nature as to why our people have been typically disadvantaged when it comes to other nations, no matter what their economic or political system. No matter what their economic or political system, we appear to have a distinct disadvantage compared to others. As an example, when other Asiatics come from other countries, or from the islands, you can see them quickly come into communities and get buildings that may have been empty since we were going to school, and our people can't figure out how they do it. They're not sitting around worrying about who's the mayor or who's the president. They immediately begin to make economic progress because they deal with national and international laws, while our people still deal with beliefs that were given to them by colonists. And that's distinctly a problem. What we have done is taken our beliefs as a basis of knowledge, which is really is not. It's just simply elementaries, you know. And so the other problem is that we're trained with what you call a pseudo-religious sense of self-righteousness. And so we take belief systems and try to put them on the table with knowledge and science, and then can't compete with the civilized world. And then rather than us study or deal with the sciences as our forefathers did, we start accusing everybody of racism and prejudice when actually we're out of order. And rather than admit that we lack knowledge, we get angry or frustrated. So the problem is that actually our people need to be educated and understanding how this world really operates. And so essentially, when you're talking about birthright, science, government, anthropology, sociology, cosmology, masonry, the things that actually run this planet, most of those things have not been on the agenda of the educational system for our people, because those are keys that the Romans removed from our societies in order to create this miseducation. And although our people know they burned the books, the problem is they don't know about the books that were burnt. That is actually the real culture. This is the reason why most wealthy people will spend tons of finance for old books that we consider junk, because that's where the education is. And so when you introduce them to some of the knowledge that comes out from the ancient, they have an acute disrespect for it, not recognizing that it actually belonged to their own forefathers. The other interesting thing that I recognize, even when you're coming up here, when you start talking about science and law and culture to our people, because of the training that we have, we start looking at it as something that belongs to somebody else as opposed to our own forefathers, not recognizing that the civilized world was civilized because our forefathers civilized them, and disrespecting that principle. Meanwhile, the civilized world has very little compassion for ignorance, because ignorance of law and self is no excuse, although we consistently make it. And I also want to say back to what Brother Jelani was saying, like for instance, like this book here is a American Heritage High School Dictionary. It's not a great dictionary, it's just basic, what they use in, high school, junior high school. You can take these children right here, take them to the brand black, and teach them how to read a dictionary. They'll see it's an adjective, but the adult will tell them it's a proper noun. So then you have a conflict because the adult doesn't know classification of words. You see the problem? Not only that, you can go into it and it will tell you that it's OE, or Old English, or NE, Middle English, which means it has no history on the planet beyond the 5th century. And then our people will take that brand and then make it retroactive in ancient Kemet, and in ancient Asiatic world, talking about ancient black gods and everything, and immediately it's a false platform because the word didn't exist. As a matter of fact, the original meaning of the word black is actually pale, because it's an English word, Old English word, and it applied to the Paleolithic or the Neanderthal man. And the scientific name for the Neanderthal man is the troglodyte nigger. And that's how the word nigger got into the language. And so what you have is you have Asiatics that are taking on names that actually originally belonged to the caveman, not to themselves. And so they don't know anything about status, and they don't know that black and white are statuses. They think they're identities because the colonists trained our people accordingly. And also not understanding that the first issue in law in your communications and interfacing with other people is status. And so as soon as you use a brand or a name that is not your own, or a name of another nation, you're automatically in law what is called a colored person, which means a fake. But they think that color is an identity. As a legal status, meaning a fraud, a prima facie, misrepresentation, a semblance distinguished from that which is real. And then our people take the miseducation, go out into the civilized world, put that miseducation on the other civilized world, and then when they reject us, we accuse them of prejudice rather than recognizing that we are dishonoring our mothers and our fathers. And so these are some of the dynamics that have to be cleaned up in spite of our people's arrogance and self-righteousness to try to get through to them, to make them, or to bring our people back into the constitutional fold of civilized government, which of course they assume that was established by Europeans when it was not. It was established by Moorish, which is why all those secret societies wear our feathers, because that's the crown of the planet. So it's a lot of dynamics that has to be corrected. And again, we can't resolve a lot of the other problems until we resolve the status issue. And just like, for instance, because of miseducation, many of our people think that North, Central, and South America is India, and think that we're Indians, simply because colonists said that. And so then we try to claim Indian as the identity of this land and the people, which is another fraud. It's a diversion. When actually the Europeans named the Atlantis Islands India because they thought they got to Hindustan when he was taking over the trade routes of the Moors seeking the spice trade in the Mauryan dynasty, which is in Hindustan, that used to be Paro, that they call India today. You know, so they call the people here India because we had fezzes on. They seen all these islands with these stone heads that are ancient with fezzes on, and they saw the culture was very similar. And so they call us Indians, but they know that we're not Indians. And for instance, it was in the year, actually, 1815, when the Europeans took on the title of American when they were not Americans, really Americans. So the people don't really know the history. What happens is the Europeans actually stolen the history, buried it, and then traded places, and now we're calling him the American when he's actually European, and then call ourselves black, which is actually the lowest status on the planet. It's a status they think is an identity. You call him white, actually, which is a legal term, which means a sovereign. And so it's so much correction that has to be made before we can administer anything, is to clean up the miseducation, and then, you know, get past the emotionalism that always pops up.
All right, at this time, I'm going to choose to play devil's advocate. To get you, the crowd, more actively involved, I'm going to start off with some questions. Questions you might have, questions you might not have, questions after you hear it, now you have. So what I'm going to start off with is the question going out to all three panelists is, and each one can take their time answering the question. And my first question is, what is nationality versus UCCs? What the difference between nationality and UCC? Yeah, I'm going to start right off the bat.
UCCs, that's a Uniform Commercial Codes, and they were actually commercial codes. They became uniform in about 1968 when Texas, which was the last corporate state under force and pressure from the Barristers Association, adopted it, and then they became uniform. Actually, Uniform Commercial Codes is a system that the corporate states resolved for discharging debts amongst each other because they have created a fraud to steal all the gold and the silver, which is the reason why the Europeans came here in the first place. Mm-hmm. And so it was actually used for church, etc. Now, the deal is, and it's very, very, very simple for those who may have some confusion about the UCCs. UCCs have their place. When a person is trying to use the UCCs to supplant constitutional principle, then they've been tricked. When a person supplants the UCCs to try to claim sovereignty, they've been tricked. And it's very simple. So, like, and the best thing to do is like, it's very important for people to know fundamental contract law. Not only contract law, but the essence of contracts. Years ago, about 22, 23 years ago, we used to teach people about the Uniform Commercial Codes, and we recognized that we stopped doing it because what happened was people was taking the UCCs and immediately running and trying to use them when they really didn't have a concept behind them, and then they stopped studying birthright. Started throwing out documents, started getting responses, getting counter charges and everything, and then couldn't defend it, and then get frustrated or creating problems because they was actually standing in two camps. And one of the things you recognize is that people start dealing with contract principle without learning the principles and laws of contract, even knowing that there's about 33 different types of contract. And so the fundamentals of contract, when you look at a lot of people, they will talk about a contract consists of an offer, consideration, and an acceptance. And you find that most people that would go with the UCC come from that perspective without a knowledge of the fundamental essence of contract, which includes mutuality. You cannot be under threat, duress, or coercion. You can't. Contract is void if it's done without free will. It is void ab initio, from its creation, if you're not a participant in it. It's void if it's vague. It's void if it has no substance. And so what you have that I've watched happen over and over again is as the colonial powers recognized that Aboriginal people were starting to wake up to birthright issues, they start pushing